Hi, everybody. Today, Thursday, March 13, 2025, and our friend Pepe Escobar is back with us. Welcome back, Pepe.
Sawadee Kap, Nima, all of you. Greetings from Thailand, one of the Chinese towers right behind me. Greetings from ASEAN and greetings from a BRICS partner.
Let's get started, Pepe, with what has happened between Ukraine and the United States. They're talking about a 30-day ceasefire. And right after that, you see that Marco Rubio put out on his social media on X that the ball is now on Russia's court, and reiterated by Emmanuel Macron, Kaya Kallas, and Ursula von der Leyen. And if I were in Moscow, I would say, what are they doing? And is that a coordinated sort of policy attitude on the part of the West? On the other hand, the Russians are talking about they don't know the details. And the question right now, the main doubt on the part of Russians, I think, is the details of what has happened in Saudi Arabia. What's your take on what has happened?
Well, many of the answers to your very good question are already in the way you posed it. When you came with the litany of spiders that immediately approved the 30-day ceasefire, that's part of the answer. This is what they wanted because they know that this is absolutely ideal for in the current mega negative conditions for Ukraine in the Donbass battlefields and in Kursk, which they practically abandoned. It would be perfect. 30-day to regroup, rearm, and continue the war when they are losing badly on every front. So it's no wonder that these specimens in Europe approved it. Well, as we know, as we're speaking right now, Witkoff is already in Moscow. He landed a few hours ago. So he might meet Putin maybe, let's say, early evening on this Thursday or on Friday morning. So before the weekend, certainly we're going to have the official Russian, I wouldn't say response, but the Russian reasoning to, I described this, in a very, very short manner on my ex Twitter account as a tawdry kabuki spectacle inside a matryoshka, which is what it is. This is a matryoshka, a cheap matryoshka, not the really good ones. And inside you have a lot of kabuki figures. And you're peeling off the masks of these kabuki figures. At the end, what you see? You see one of the matryoshka figures dressed up as Minsk tree. This is let's say, a sort of a Minsk tree in drag. Maybe this matryoshka is an LGBT woke. And that would explain why the Europeans loved it so much. But let's call her Lady Minsk tree. And if we can all see that, Nima, obviously the best minds in Moscow can also see it for what it is. So what is required from Russia now, considering that this is a major change of narrative? And once again, the only thing that the empire and the attaches of the empire know what to do is they are in the narrative confectionery business. So they can change from narrative to some narrow, some with more sugar, some with less sugar, some like a tiramisu, you name it. So the Russians are going to have to apply another Sun Tzu maneuver. And basically, they will say, of course, we are in favor of a ceasefire. But what kind of ceasefire? What are as you said in your part of your question, what are the details of the ceasefire? Apparently, considering what was leaked, Witkoff is going to tell Putin, the, I would say, the footnotes of this big bombastic pronouncement. Ukraine agreed to a 30-day ceasefire, and now the ball is in Russia's court. Well, the Russians don't even know what kind of a ball is that, right? So when Witkov theoretically explains what's inside the ball to Putin, then we're going to have a Russian counterpunch, let's put it this way. We all know that the ceasefire per se is beyond absurd. And even people who still have their critical faculties in the West, they know it as well, although they cannot say it in public. So we had already a partial response, which was fascinating yesterday. For the first time since the beginning of the SMO, Putin was wearing a military uniform. Exactly. This is what you're showing it now. When he visited, and Gerasimov, of course, went out to greet him personally. Then he read his report, etc. This is the first time that we see the commander-in-chief of armed forces of the Russian Federation in a military uniform. And this is extremely serious because, among other things, he wants the operation in Kursk to finish as soon as possible, and that's exactly what's happening. He went there to basically order, finish this up now. He designated the Ukrainians in Kursk as terrorists, and all the foreigners who are there are mercenaries that are not covered by the Geneva Convention, so we can all imagine what's going to happen to these mercenaries. So this is a pretty serious deal, right? So we can interpret this as, let's sort a preliminary response. Now it's different. Now we're going to have, for instance, in a serious diplomatic world, we would have the US Secretary of State going to Russia to talk to the president of the Russian Federation. We have an emissary. That's not very serious, but okay, this is the Trump world, right? This guy's not even a diplomat, Nima. This guy's a real estate billionaire mogul from New York. So he's not exactly a diplomat. So okay, so the President Putin and the Security Council in Moscow. Okay, all right. Consider that this guy is speaking directly as if it's coming from the President of the United States. Let's hear what he has to say. There will be no big news about it because the Russians already know the backstory leading to what happened in Jeddah. And the way the Brits basically pulled Zelensky by the neck, sat him down and said, now you're going to listen to us and you're going to do exactly what we're going to tell you because you have to mend the situation that you fucked up in the first place. So Zelensky, since Jeddah, and he was not in Jeddah, this was the previous to the US-Ukraine delegations meeting in Jeddah. He changed completely his own narrative. He apologized, even if not properly. But once again, this is Kiev, a bunch of criminals. And basically, he's following the British diktat, let's put it this way. And that's where our kabuki masks inside the matryoshka, they acquire a swamp element to it. You know, they are slimy, they are horrible, they're like toxic underwater animals, you know, because it goes directly to the Brit interest in prolonging this war as long as possible. And the deal that they already signed before with Zelensky, a completely illegal deal signed with a completely illegal president, the famous 100-year partnership as it was sold by that ghastly creature Starmer, where one of the hidden clauses that nobody knows about because nobody actually read it But once again, because he's a loud mouse, Boris Johnson himself let it escape what's in the footnotes, in the hidden footnotes, is that basically these minerals and what was going to be left of rare earth deposits in what's going to be left of Ukraine, plus the ports and all that will be managed by the Brits, not by the Americans. So this is the Brit Zelensky totally illegal deal that was already signed, clinched by both parties. The Americans know that, and the Americans want their own deal with Zelensky, which, if they sign with Zelensky, is also going to be illegal because he is an illegal president at the moment. So then we have an intra-NATO fight between the Brits and the Americans. And now they are positioning to see which party is going to get the best possible deal out of this expiring presidency sooner or later. The Brits are already grooming their man, the next leader of Ukraine, Zaluzhny, in London for months now. And the Americans want somebody else, which they still don't have their candidate. So, so the clash continues. What Jeddah allowed was something even more perverse, Nima, was once again the realignment of Americans and Europeans, Westerners, Brits included, on rearming Ukraine. So this is the key thing. All this blah, blah, blah about ceasefire deal pales compared to the fact that the Americans are continuing now, they are restarting, providing Ukraine with intel, which they had suspended for a while, and obviously with more weapons later on. So as you can see, and our audience can see, this is really a very toxic matryoshka environment, And obviously the Russians can see all the details, especially because they follow all the devious games of perfidious Albion in detail, considering that the UK is formally at every level at war with Russia. They are directly at war with Russia, and the British ruling classes are directly at war with Russia. And Moscow, they understand this perfectly well. But because they are too polite and still too diplomatic, they haven't done anything drastic about it yet. But we may be getting there later on, right? So what we can expect about let's say, the Russian qualification of the 30-day ceasefire is, well, we received information from your emissary, Mr. President, talking to Trump. And once again, our position has been very clear for months, for now on, reiterated over and over again by President Putin, by the Minister of Foreign Relations, everything. Without following these guidelines, there will be no ceasefire. If we follow these guidelines, of course, we're more than ready for a ceasefire. So what we're going to have? We're going to have probably a tantrum in Washington. We're going to have a serial tantrum by Trump, Rubio, emissaries, generals, whatever, and the war will continue, which suits Russia fine, because Russia is advancing and Russia is winning the war on an everyday basis. So that's where we are at the moment. We are at a wait and see moment, basically for the continuation of what was happening until a few days ago. But now, obviously, with always an extra element of bombast, fireworks, firecrackers, which the essence of Mr. Disco Inferno and Trump 2.0. The problem is, Nima and all of you, is that all these things condition the news cycle, all these changes of narrative. And in 1, 2, 3 days, there'll be another radical change of narrative. And they never address the root cause of the war in Ukraine. And this is what the Russians are trying to, maybe they'll try to imprint once again in a phone call. Maybe the next few days, we're going to have a new phone call, Putin, Trump, and Putin will have to explain on the phone, perhaps for 2 hours at least, the root causes of the war and why Russia is insisting that we cannot have a ceasefire and the beginning of a solution in Ukraine if we don't address the root causes of everything that has been happening, not only since Maidan, but even before, since the fall of the Soviet Union, for that matter. But is Trump ready to understand that? No. Are the people around him ready to understand that? No. Is the deep state ready to understand that? No, no, no. And are the American ruling classes ready to admit that this is what has to be discussed? Zillions of no's. There you go.
I'm not even sure that Donald Trump knows the reality of what's going on in
He
between
does
Russia
not,
and
Ivan.
Ukraine.
He does not. He has no clue. And he doesn't have anybody to actually sit down with him and provide this information. Of course, he does. He could talk to Colonel Douglas McGregor. He could talk to Mayor Scheimer face to face. You know, of course, there are excellent American analysts who know exactly what's going on since Maidan and even before Maidan. Even better, Jeffrey Sachs can tell him the whole story coming from the 90s, you know. But people around Trump, obviously not. It's not going to be those two-bit real estate tycoons in New York who are going to explain the intricacies of the post-Cold War environment in Ukraine and the post-Soviet space. They have absolutely no clue about that.
We have to accept that Donald Trump is so much influenced by what he sees and what he's been told to. And we know that we had a Ukrainian drone attack on Russia before this talks happening. It
Yes,
seems that, in my opinion, is a British move. They're
it
trying to
is.
provide intelligence to Ukrainians to do that in order to convince Trump that Ukraine is able to fight Russia. Let's fight.
We needed to show something before Jeddah, Nima. You're absolutely correct. So, what what better PR operation than launching 350 drones, and many of them directed against Moscow itself? So now we are still fighting. But this is basic MI. It's just basic. You studied this on MI6 for beginners. You know, this is what they do all the time. And obviously, the Brits are controlling everything that is coming out of Kiev, especially now that after they signed the so-called 100-year deal partnership or whatever. So they are much more dangerous than NATO, much more dangerous than the Europeans individually. Compared to the pitiful French and Germans, you know, the Brits are way ahead, especially because they already have the long-term thing planned. And for instance, this control of ports, for instance, this means in practice, the Brits controlling the port of Odessa. This is absolutely key in the whole story. They will do anything possible apart from maybe nuclear war to prevent the Russians to get all the way to Odessa, because they need control of at least a substantial part of the Black Sea, and they need control of what's left of Ukraine. Ukraine needs Black Sea outlets, so they'll do everything about it. This is the key factor in the whole thing. The Black Sea, it's the key factor. The Americans, maybe they don't see it very much because Trump doesn't even care about NATO. Trump is looking at, obviously, China. And he would love, at best, a new NATO with Poland as the center of this new controlling NATO, going towards Eastern Europe. And they have the perfect bunch of rabbit poles to conduct the new NATO business from now on. This is as far as Trump goes in terms of NATO. And for the rest, we all know, pay up 5%, and if you don't, that's it. We won't do anything to defend you.
I think the main concern on the part of Russians is what the British government is trying to do. As you've mentioned, they're preparing Zelensky to be the next president of Ukraine, but I would also consider Zelensky to be re-elected again, because they are preparing for everything, and we know what has happened in Romania. We know what are doing
Of
they're doing
course,
in Romania. They can do. Ukraine is just is a mess, is a chaos, and
absolutely.
they can do the same in Ukraine. They can put whatever they want, whoever they want in as the president of Ukraine, and make Ukraine. I think it's not all about the preconditions for the ceasefire. It's about what comes next in the aftermath of a Ukrainian settlement. What would happen to the western part of Ukraine? Are they going to make a new Idlib for Russia at their border? I think this is the huge concern on the part of Russia, and they have to think of this.
Exactly. It's a huge concern. And at the same time, there is the other possibility, which is what if Western Ukraine is going to be a free for all? The Russians won't say no. Okay, Hungarians, Polish, Romanians, come here and take all the lands that were yours until the beginning of the 20th century. Cool. Perfect. So, the possibility is still open of total balkanization of Ukraine and fragmentation of Ukraine, of post Ukraine, rump Ukraine, whatever you want to call it. Of course, but the Russians know exactly what they want. Apart from Novorossiya, apart from the regions which are now part of Russia, legally, constitutionally, what's open is all the way to Odessa and the famous link with Transnistria. We don't know. Once again, very important. The only one who knows as far Russia wants to go and is willing to go is the big guy. And he's not going to tell anybody, not even Gerasimov.
I don't know if you saw in the Financial Times, there is an article that it says that the Polish president is asking the United States to put nuclear bombs on their.
Nuclear weapons in
Yeah,
full.
it's yeah.
How can you possibly take these imbeciles as seriously? If you say something like this, not only it proves that you are no diplomat, but you are suicidal. This is it's beyond any Russian red line. And the Russians always will make sure that yeah, okay, just wait, do it, just wait. But
And
what can you expect, Nima? They are like a very happy bunch of cockroaches after the Singing Jeddah. All of them, the Poles, the Brits, the batshit Estonian chick, von der Lugen, all of them, a choir of cockroaches, dancing in the middle of wow. It's like Chic was playing in the background. Les fric, c'est chic. That it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. But it was a tactical victory for them, and we can interpret this to a large extent that the so-called divide between Washington and Brussels is not that much a divide in the end. This is also part of a narrative that is being planted a little bit everywhere. What we know for sure is that in terms of the US deep state and Brussels, they still want exactly what they wanted before Trump came to power. The problem now for them is Trump trying to get some sort of dialogue with Putin. And that's why both are immediately lumped together as a sort of new Hitlerian amorphous concoction. That's the problem. So never underestimate the deep state, and never underestimate how immensely corrupt the whole Brussels system is. And they still want exactly what they wanted, even if they have an IQ over 10, they can see that Project Ukraine is dead. No, it's the return of the living dead. They want the return of the living dead ad infinitum, because this is their way. Oh, one day we're going to make it in terms of inflicting strategic defeat against Russia. Maybe not now, but maybe if we rearm Ukraine, maybe in 1 year, maybe there's going to be an Ukrainian offensive in 2026. They actually believe in all this crap. So this has not changed at all. And Trump, it's getting more and more complicated by the day, because there are many. If we start to connect some of the dots, he's getting lost in his own bombast, because he needs one bombast a day to monopolize the news cycle day after day. Now he's entangled in everything that he's saying and promising, and now we are 75% getting close to a solution in Ukraine and all that. No, you don't have facts to back that up. You have just bombast. So you cannot have a foreign policy based on bombast after bombast, which is what we have so far, right? And obviously, when you have a team around them, they are not. Can you, Nima, give me a break. Put Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov in the same room. It's even unfair. The gap is unfair. Get a two-bit tycoon like Witkov getting to the Kremlin to talk to Putin and the big guys around. Come on, it's a joke. It's a joke. So obviously the Russians know that. It's not that they don't take it serious. They take it with the typical Russian smirk over here, and they're very sad. Wow, we have to deal with these clowns all over again. Can they come up with something tangible and realistic? For the moment, nothing. Absolutely nothing.
What comes to your mind when Europeans want some sort of security guarantee for Ukraine? What do they want to give to Ukraine? What do they want to provide Ukraine with?
Nothing. The only thing that they can provide Ukraine, by the way, with money that they don't have, is more weapons. In fact, the metaphor came from the toxic Medusa in Brussels herself. Nah? Was it a steel porcupine, if I'm not mistaken? Her own words. I think this summarizes what the EU and the European Commission want from Ukraine. A perpetual steel porcupine provoking the bear. Ad infinitum. That's it. They don't care about Ukrainians. They don't care about Ukrainian NATO, because obviously nobody in his right mind in Europe, different nation states, will allow Ukraine to be part of the EU. They don't care about Ukraine or NATO, but they want a hyper-armed, weaponized to death steel porcupine provoking Russia. This is what remains of Project Ukraine, right? So they will consider this a victory, right? And that's where all this blah, blah, blah of the new BlackRock chancellor of Germany, the absolutely ghastly Petit Roi in Paris, new armies, peacekeeping forces, rearming Europe, and obviously the Brussels fabulous plan of getting 800 billion euros out of thin air to rearm Europe. And now I'm talking to a lot of my European contacts, sources, etc. The average European citizen, especially in Germany, in France, they are already starting to feel extremely paranoid about their money. They are already starting to make moves to get their money out of Europe. Because sooner or later, what are we going to have, Nima? We're going to have nation states in Europe, part of the European Union, going after Europeans' savings accounts to finance this 800 billion rearm plan. This in some countries, if this happens in France and it's legitimized by the French parliament, then I assure you, and I assure all of you, there will be a civil war in France. There's no question about that. You can do anything with the French except try to confiscate their money, especially their savings, right? One glimpse of rationality. The Dutch parliament, 2 days ago or so, they vetoed Dutch taxpayers' contribution to this bloody 800 billion euro rearm fantasy. So it will depend on national parliaments in all these nations to veto this idea and cut off Brussels' neck with that. But they can, don't forget, Brussels, they can always find a way around it. So this is extremely serious in terms of the everyday life of the average European citizen. They are all like, oh shit, they're going to come after our money. And they will. And they will.
If you remember, there was an article 2, 3 days ago. We had an article in Financial Times. It says that France, Germany, and the United Kingdom are doing everything in order to make any sort of Ukrainian settlement between the United States and Russia inoperable.
Inoperable. You're absolutely correct.
Here,
Of
here
course
is
they are.
here is what Nikolai Patrushev, he said that there is information that NATO countries intend to intensify terrorist actions against Russia on the Russian underwater pipelines, tankers, and dry cargo ships. If they go after some sort of terrorist attacks to sabotage what has happened so far or what is going to happen between Russia and the United States, what do we know about the reaction coming out of Washington and Moscow?
Nima, we don't know. The only thing we know is that Putin will finally have to take the gloves off. In fact, he kept the gloves on for 3 years already. That's very, very long. And there are a lot of people in Russia public opinion, discussions that we have with well-placed people in Moscow. And there is a feeling that, look, that's enough. Solve this thing, meaning militarily solve this thing, which is something that the Russians could have done it before. They don't because they want to minimize civilian casualties in Ukraine. So they are fighting with one hand behind their backs all the time. So if we have the West, or what's left of the collective West, as we know now, is dead and buried. But let's say the hyena face of the former collective West, which is basically the European Union, European Commission, and NATO. If they start using mercenaries for terror attacks against Russia, then all gloves will have to be off. And obviously the Americans, they can always have plausible deniability. The Trump administration can always say, look, we have nothing to do with this. This is the Europeans that are doing. So the wrath of the bear will be directed against Europe, not the US, which is something that Trump may use to disconnect the US from NATO in several levels. And everything that happens that is negative, he goes on, after all, he controls the globe's megaphone, right? And he says, look, we have nothing to do with this. They did it. So it's very, very serious, because the possibilities of, I would say, a fragmentation of the war by the post-collective West against Russia, they are planting the seeds now. It's like a fragmentation bomb, and then we're going to have, splinters going all over the spectrum, and obviously hurting Russia. So Narishkin knows that, the FSB know that, Patrushev know that, the top guys in Moscow, they all know that. And obviously, they are doing their preparations. No question about that. But the last word, obviously, comes from the big guy. And the big guy, after this very, very cowardly attack with the drones right before Jeddah and donning his military uniform, that was a pretty powerful message. Very, very powerful. Symbolically, wow, up there, like, look, there are limits, and you are exhausting my patience. And it's a very bad move to exhaust the patience of the top bear. But that's where we're heading. And with the Americans, they're being very, very patient. And Lavrov has been saying it over and over again. When he talked to our friends earlier this week, Judge Knapp and Larry in Moscow, was a wonderful. Larry told me it was a wonderful comment, and it was. You can feel that Lavrov loves talking to foreigners that try to understand the Russian position. There are not many. There are very, very few. And when we are in Moscow, any of us, and we have a chance to talk to him, you can feel how he relishes talking to rational analysts from abroad, which is something that he never had. Very, very few opportunities to do that in Russia. And with the Europeans, forget it. Absolutely out of the question. But they're being very, very patient, Nima, very, very patient. But if Trump keeps pulling these stunts, one stunt after another, without substance, based only on bombast and controlling the news cycle, sooner or later, the Russian patience is going to disappear as well, vis-a-vis the Trump administration. So, they still have, I would say, a little bit of political capital in let's say, the first 100 years, right? But if they do something again like they did with the Jeddah thing, which was basically to have Trump be able to tell the whole world, I'm posing as a peacemaker, and I managed to convince those idiots in Kiev to accept a ceasefire. And now I hope the Russians are going to do the same. Without context, without putting it into perspective, nothing. It's a cheap stunt. It's a circus ringmaster kind of gambit, The Russians are very serious people. The people at the leadership, they want a serious, the beginning of a serious discussion. We are at the stage of having diplomatic missions on both sides, getting into a kind of renewed dialogue, serious dialogue, etc., and then start discussing the serious issues. If you keep pulling up this stunts, what kind of seriousness there is, Sooner or later, the Russians are going to say, no, we can't. We also cannot trust these people. It's a bunch of clowns. Yeah. But that's Trump's modus operandi, Nima. It's like that. The problem is, it's all, well, in Texas, I love this Texas saying, all hat and no cattle. In the case of Trump, it's the same thing. All bombastic hat and zero cattle. The cattle is dead.
Pepe, here is what Lavrov said in that meeting that you mentioned between Lavrov and
with
Larry
the judge,
Johnson, and he had the judge there. Yeah. Here is what he said in terms of the interest of Russian Federation, Russia, and the United States.
Okay.
I want normal relations. Normal relations in the sense that the foundation of the American foreign policy under the Trump administration is national interest of the United States. This is absolute and without any discussion. But at the same time, we understand that other countries also have their national interests. Right. And those countries who have their national interests and don't play into the hands of somebody else's interest, right, we are ready to have serious discussion. It is very well understood. They told us that countries like the United States and Russia would never have their national interest the same. They would not coincide, maybe even 50 or less percent. But when they do coincide, this situation, if we are responsible politicians, must be used to develop this simultaneous and similar interest into something practical which would be mutually beneficial, be it economic projects, infrastructural projects, something else. And then another message went, but when the interests do not coincide and contradict each other, again, this is then the responsible countries must do everything not to allow this contradiction to degenerate into confrontation, especially military confrontation, which would be disastrous for many other countries.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a portrait of rationality, isn't Nima?
Yeah.
And explained very diplomatically, taking care of all sides, inclusiveness. This is what a real diplomat does. Do we see American diplomats do something like this? Or not to mention the Chihuahuas in Europe? No, out of the question. We could see the Chinese do it, like Wang Yi. Last week, I was concentrated on the two sessions in Beijing, especially when Wang Yi spoke to the media on Friday. And Wang Yi sounded like Lavrov. No wonder they get along so well. Taking the interests of everybody, sitting at the same table. And even if there are contradictions, do our best so this won't degenerate into a military confrontation, like Lavrov just said. If this was an European diplomat speaking, like the batshit crazy Estonian chick in head of European foreign policy, she starts with war by definition. She can only think in terms of, her brain is wired to think in terms of confrontation and war. It's not a diplomatic brain. When we see Lavrov, we see immediately how a diplomatic brain works.
And what's so strange, I think, to Europeans is the national interest. That when he's talking about the national interest, what does that mean for European? I don't know if that exists in Europe anymore.
It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't exist because national interest in terms of the European Union and Brussels is the interest of the Brussels machine. It's not the national interest of Lisbon or Rome. No, not at all. So the fact that when in terms of diplomacy, when you talk about Europe, you're talking about a construct, about something completely artificial that doesn't care and doesn't take into consideration national interests of the nation states. By definition, that explains why there's no diplomacy in Europe. Because the nation states are not duly represented. You are defending the interests of a Kafkian machine, essentially.
The other point that he's making in this talk, that Russia and the United States can cooperate, can normalize their relationship, but we know that we have our differences. We have our way of getting better and improving. That's why here comes the idea of Greater Eurasia, which was mentioned by the Russian officials. They're talking about, which the United States is not part of that. The United States doesn't want to cooperate with that, at least under the Biden administration. We don't know yet if the Trump administration is going to have a new attitude. How do you see the deal, this sort of communication between the Trump administration and Russia, the way that Lavrov is trying to picture that? He says less than 50%, less than 50%. It's huge when he's talking. He's brutally honest with Americans. How do you see the communication between the two parties?
They're starting, Nima. They are in the first stage of establishing credible and relatively deep diplomatic communication between both diplomatic missions in Washington and in Moscow, especially. So we are practically, this is a restart from zero. They are rebooting the operating system from scratch because it was completely destroyed during the previous crash test dummy experiment. Let's put it this way. So at least now we have, let's say, a glimmer of hope in terms of rational dialogue between Washington and Moscow. In terms of Moscow and Brussels, forget it. Absolutely out of the question. You have to destroy the European Commission and restart them, which is something that is not going to happen in the near future, unfortunately, right? So, and that fits into our analysis of the end of the collective West. If this restart of a dialogue between Washington and Moscow in the next few weeks and months start to have, fruits that everybody can see, look around and say, wow, it's working, etc. Obviously, Brussels, they're going to get even more isolated. Of course, they're going to get angrier. Their terror tactics were going to be exploding everywhere. But who cares? Because they are irrelevant. Geopolitically and geoeconomically, morally, ethically, nowadays, they are plunging into total irrelevance. I always remember what Gore Vidal was saying in the mid-1980s. To give you an idea, all of you, that was a long time ago, exactly. It was when I started as a foreign correspondent. I went to the signing of one of his books in London, and then we had a brief conversation afterwards. And Gore Vidal was saying at the time was, in the future, Europe is not going to be more than a boutique. This was 40 years ago. He could see the long term. That's absolutely what it is now. Europe, for a great deal of the global south, the global majority, will be, okay, let's go there and buy a few Gucci's, Hermes, Louis Vuitton, eat very good food, and then we leave. That's it. Irrelevant, a tourist destination. And for many, not a tourist destination because it's horribly expensive, right? For those who can afford it. But in the international arena, in terms of setting the tone of diplomatic relations and geopolitical relations across the globe, completely irrelevant. And because of them, they are digging their own graves. Their leadership in Brussels is digging their own graves, and the guidelines that they impose on the nation states. That's it. It's a very sorry affair. I wonder what the great diplomats of the European past, let's put it this way, if they were alive today, and we will be seeing that as like Bismarck, Talleyrand, Metternich, they will be like, wow, what have we done wrong? Oh, okay. You're going to have to study how the European Union was conceived. That will answer a lot of questions.
Was that surprising to you that China, for the first time, is saying that the United States is trying to bully Russia? They're saying that the way that, in terms of right after the ceasefire, they said that it's not a good sign that the United States is going to deal with Russia. They didn't find it, and they were just honestly reporting on it. They're saying that it doesn't work if you go that way. Is there, because in the talk that Lavrov had with Larry and George, he said that he was somehow citing China, India, and the global south, that don't be concerned about what's going on right now between Russia and the United States. And even he mentioned Africa, and we have our ties. There is nothing to in between us and between us as the party, as a party. How do you see? Is there any sort of concern on the part of global South that the Trump administration may make some sort of move that they can, I don't know, separate Russia from the global South? Is there any sort of concern on considering that? That's why Russia is talking, China is talking this way.
The best Chinese analysts, Nima, they are paying very, very close attention to this dance, the Trump Putin dance. In fact, only Trump is dancing. He's dancing with himself. That reminds me of the old Billy Idol hit, "Dancing with Myself." That's Trump once again. And Trump was probably dancing that in New York discotheques during the 80s. So he's dancing with himself, and the Russians are looking. The Russians are spectators at the moment. The Chinese are also spectators, and they are scrutinizing every move. It's fascinating. If you go to Guangzhou, for instance, which I go every day to Guangzhou, some of the analysis are outstanding by some of the best Chinese academics. For instance, they know they do the breakdown of the forces supporting Trump, and they do the breakdown of their internal contradictions as well. For instance, when they do the breakdown and they say, okay, there are three powers behind Trump, three major powers. And that's very Chinese. It's always a numerological thing. The three major powers are Wall Street, heavy industry, especially steel, mining, and energy, and Silicon Valley. But they have competing agendas, and then they enumerate the agendas. And then there are the side powers. They are not very important, but they also have a say, like real estate, for instance. So it's fascinating. So they know exactly what's going on in Washington and in New York, the Chinese. And obviously, when they get deeper into, okay, what about us? They say, look, this anything that they try to divide Russia from China is bound to fail. And then, of course, it's like they are reiterating what Wang Yi said last Friday at the end of the two sessions about the Russia-China strategic partnership and what the Russians are also saying about it. And, of course, in terms of BRICS, they don't specifically get into what BRICS should do this year, for instance. But they use a sort of indirect Chinese comparison using the Belt and Road Initiative, using the New Silk Roads. For the Chinese, BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and BRICS, they are interconnected, and they are in many aspects. For them, the priority in terms of Chinese geopolitics and geoeconomics is BRI. It's not BRICS, although they are one of the top BRICS. At the same time, they understand that they are one of the top BRICS and their top partners, Russia, China, Iran as well. Brazil is more complicated. Brazil is a bit too far away from everything. But because Brazil, the largest trade partner of Brazil is China, the Chinese pay a lot of attention to Brazil. So in their minds, they say, whatever he does, he's not going to affect how we as BRICS are integrating more and more. So it's fascinating. They don't seem to be, they are not intimidated by any move by Trump 2.0. They are not afraid of what may come next. Wang Yi actually said bluntly, and Wang Yi is usually extremely diplomatic. He said, look, we are prepared for any kind of war. If they want a war, whatever, war, hybrid war, we're ready. And they are. And they are. The Chinese are ready. And when you look at how they were planning economically for the year 2025, this mix of what they call the dual role economically, like lots of internal investments, domestic investors, and at the same time amplifying their global reach as a huge trading power. They will continue to do exactly the same thing. They admit their challenges, the real estate market, creation of jobs. They want to create 12 million extra jobs, investment in all the top high-tech domains, which will continue. It's the Made in China 2025. I recommend all of you, our audiences, take a look at my column for Sputnik this week. The title is Made in China 2025 Revisited, where I talk about all these vectors: domestic Chinese policy, Chinese foreign policy, and why they are succeeding over and over again, and why they are not intimidated by anything that Trump may come up with. You want another tsunami of tariffs? No problem. We're going to have our counter tariffs. Do you matter for us, America, as a trade partner? No, you don't, because our trade is with the whole planet, and you are, 3, 4, 5% of our global trade. Our trade is with the global South, with the global majority, essentially, and much more with Europe than with the US. So tariffs on us, we don't care. Bring it on. So this Chinese steadfastness and clear vision of what they're doing and where they're going, it's very refreshing to follow that and compare it, of course, with this total circus coming out of the US, right? And obviously, in terms of Europe, it's like worms having a conversation in the graveyard,
I don't know if Donald Trump is prepared for that. You see the
No, he's not.
confusion in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and
No.
he's not. We were talking about the bigger picture. We were talking about what's going on between the East and the West, between the United States particularly and China. But you see the game that he's playing with Russia in Ukraine. It's unbelievable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, he's not a strategist. He's not a diplomat. He doesn't have patience. He's obsessed with striking deals that are good for him. Usually not win-win deals, Chinese style, but win-lose deals. And not to mention the megalomania, which is intergalactic, right? Everything revolves around him. He's literally the Sun King all the time. So obviously, a character like that is not prepared to have a role of peacemaker and deal maker around the world, which implies respecting the other, implies mutual respect in every level, implies what Lavrov was telling our friends, sitting on the same table, listen to all the sides, and try not to get into confrontation. If there is danger of getting into some sort of heavy confrontation, try to minimize the possibilities. This is what diplomacy is all about.
Yeah.
So, and the fact that Trump chooses for as his diplomatic envoys people like common real estate tycoons in New York, or his Secretary of State basically is a neocon who doesn't know anything about foreign policy. Can you imagine that Marco Rubio knows where Kazakhstan is? He cannot point it on a map, So disqualifies his ideas, between commas, from the start. It's not serious. It's clownish.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pepe.
My pleasure, Nima. With
Muito
you,
obrigado.
of course, with you.
Prazer como sempre. Ei, você está curtindo aí, né?
Você está protegido no Brasil da demência toda. E agora eu estou protegido aqui na Ásia, porque aqui é um paraíso, né?
É um paraíso. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nima. Thanks all of you. All right, and pay attention to what the Russians are going to do next. This is going to be quite something.
Yeah. That would be amazing. Yeah, to see
that. Right. Cheers.
See you. Bye bye.
See you. Cheers. Bye bye. Bye bye.